Hey guys, so my plans for the start of the year were pretty simple on paper. Finish my Creature from the Krusty Krab retrospective in time for Cosmic Shake's release, and go into that game's release with nothing else on the burners, so all my focus would go towards one long video on that new game. Unfortunately, life and work got in the way as you'd expect, and things got delayed. The Creature video is close to being done, but by the time I finished that and made a proper in-depth video on Cosmic Shake, more than a month would have passed after the game released, and I would have missed my chance to cover the game while it's hot off the presses. So I made the executive decision to go off-brand and write up a small, digestible review for this new game. Partially to get something relevant out for its release, but also because I genuinely wanted to do what I could to help get the word out on this game in case it was good. And damn, this game wasn't just good, it was great. Great as in, this is not only the best original SpongeBob game we've gotten in nearly 2 decades, but it climbed all the way up to being in my top 2 favorite SpongeBob games. And if you've seen my videos, you know that's saying a lot. And I genuinely wasn't expecting that. This was my most anticipated game of 2023, but I also kept my expectations as manageable as possible because I had my worries. I have a lot of respect and admiration for Purple Lamp for being the new developers of SpongeBob games and actually being willing to try after the series' abysmal gaming output in the 2010s, but even I'll admit Rehydrated was a far from perfect remake and had a fairly problematic release. There were graphical and frame rate issues aplenty, a decent amount of bugs and glitches, a hyped up co-op mode that just ended up being a boring waste of time for both the players and the developers, and certain features and side quests were just made a lot worse prior to the patches. Not being able to refight bosses, the theater giving you game screenshots instead of concept art, and the god-awful shiny object grind from Mr. Krabs all being examples of that. Granted, most of those problems are gone now, but my point still stands. Rehydrated wasn't one of the truly great recreations of a classic like we all hoped for, and just ended up as a competent remake that we at least got to experience on modern consoles, computers, or even on the go. And for some BFBB stans, that was enough. And for some it wasn't. However, I think we can all agree that this game had more of a purpose than just winning over old fans of SpongeBob and his games. It was also meant to introduce younger fans to this game and prove that there was still a big market for licensed games about this little yellow meme lord. Rehydrated was very much the Insane trilogy of SpongeBob, and just like how Insane's success led to Crash Bandicoot 4, Rehydrated's success has given us the Cosmic Shake, the first original SpongeBob game since 2015's Hero Pants. Jeez, talk about a night and day comparison, huh? So, starting off the positives, first off, this game is absolutely gorgeous on the eyes. This game utilizes Rehydrated's engine, which, technical issues aside, did really make Bikini Bottom and the locales pop in a way they never did before. And this game is no different, except even better. A good portion of the locations are based from Rehydrated's level roster, but are given a completely new coat of paint based on a time period or theme. We get things like medieval Bikini Bottom, an old western town built on jellyfish fields, prehistoric kelp forest, and my personal favorite, a rundown abandoned glove world. The colors are vibrant, the scenery is lovely, and it really does feel like you're exploring normal locations from the show as opposed to levels in a video game, which is something it happens to have in common with BFBB. The characters also move a lot more like themselves here, both in gameplay and especially in the full motion cutscenes. There's still a fair amount of PS2 Ratchet-style in-game conversations like in BFBB, but there's way more proper cutscenes to showcase the animation team's excellent handling of body language, expression work, and exaggerated physical comedy, and it's a joy to behold. And it goes without saying, but SpongeBob has never looked better in a game. Every step, jump, and attack looks so good, and he's never felt so alive in a game before. Gotta love all that squash and stretch too, that's very important. The plot is simple and easy to understand, with SpongeBob accidentally opening rifts in the universe that sucked up countless people and buildings and needing to go inside to retrieve them, but much like a lot of the show's best episodes, it trades in a complex narrative for non-stop comedic bombardment that largely works in its favor. There are a fair share of predictable jokes and others that are clearly aiming for a younger crowd, but even as a jaded 23-year-old, I was still getting plenty of chuckles and even a few hearty laughs from the game on a consistent basis, so I'd call that a big win. In particular, Patrick was pretty enjoyable, and I gotta say, the idea to turn him into a Luma-like balloon tag-along was a great choice, because it means that SpongeBob always at least has him to bounce off during stages.
Patrick, I think we've fallen down some kind of large, dark, worm-shaped cavern.
That means it was probably made by a ferocious, terrifying creature, like a goose!
The voice performances were all great as expected, and for once, we have a SpongeBob game that has a perfect voice cast. At least I believe so. If it doesn't, it's so hard to tell that I doubt anyone is gonna mind. It's not like Mr. Krabs or Mermaid Man in BFBB, where the voice was so off that it actively distracted you and took you out of the experience. Though, I gotta say, I think Carolyn Lawrence chugged a shit ton of coffee prior to her recording session because Sandy's first couple of lines at the start of the game are so incredibly excited and borderline aggressive in how she delivers them.
You're up earlier than an insomniac rooster. In the mood for a little morning karate?
Oh, and then there's the new character, Madame Cassandra. She's a great addition to the game. She's got a great cute design, her VA is killing her deliveries, and what the story does with her, while expected, is still entertaining just thanks to her dynamic with the duo and how extra she can get with her sass and witty retorts.
I know everyone would love to be eating out of a bucket right now, but the fate of the entire universe is currently hanging in the balance.
And the gameplay, holy shrimp, the gameplay. Okay, so imagine Battle for Bikini Bottom, but put nearly every ability from that game into one character, along with a few other new toys to play with. SpongeBob is the only playable character for this adventure, but unlike previous solo Sponge games, his moveset is deep enough and fun enough to keep the game feeling satisfying the whole way through. Specifically in terms of movement, SpongeBob starts off with the standard platforming fare: running, jumping, a spin attack, and a ground slam. Nothing new for the series, but before long you gain a glide, and within a few levels you learn the karate kick, which behaves like Sonic's homing attack, and the ability to swing off fishhooks, much like Sandy's lasso. The back half of the game is full of tough platforming sequences where you're constantly alternating between jumps, glides, swings, and kicks, and I can't tell you how cool it feels to fly through these sections as fluidly as possible, to the point where you don't even need to touch the ground. Of all things, controlling SpongeBob reminded me of Hat Kid and how she handled it in Hat in Time, where the controls are so precise that you never have to stop moving, but at the same time, things aren't so slow as to take the excitement away from your actions as you dart about. To be fair, SpongeBob isn't quite as fast as Hat Kid here, but this is still the quickest and most enjoyable he's ever felt to control, and that includes the Heavy Iron games. Unfortunately, as a trade-off, the combat isn't quite on the same level of those games. The enemy variety isn't stellar, and even then, there's some weird quirks with some of these guys that don't feel intentional. For some reason, I can stun lock combo the giant jellyworms to death just by spamming the ground slam, and I don't think that's meant to happen. Besides that, the spin attack in this game feels pretty wonky from time to time with the hit detection, and it's led to me taking my fair share of damage just because the bubble wand phased right through enemies. That said, it's far from what I'd call bad or even particularly bland combat, and things definitely get more interesting and enjoyable once you unlock the kick and a few extra enemy types show up. This is still easily the best combat we've gotten in a SpongeBob game since the movie game, so I'd say it's harmless at worst and actually pretty fun at its best. The levels themselves are fantastic. Not only are they visually wonderful, but each one feels pretty distinct from one another in terms of objectives, set pieces, and overall game feel, while still never straying far from the game's core of platforming, combat, and collecting. Most of it's either really cool or really charming, whether it's riding along on wild seahorses, navigating a hedge maze full of traps, or trick-or-treating in Rock Bottom. There are some little minigames sprinkled in there that are just kind of whatever. I wasn't exactly giddy from mashing the spacebar multiple times to raise the Flying Dutchman's socks or pose for paparazzi, but they're infrequent enough and really just serve as little distractions meant to boost the game's already impressive variety. The levels are definitely a lot more story-focused and linear compared to Battle for Bikini Bottom, and that can be said for the game as a whole. To get to the final boss, all you need to do is get to the end of each level, but I don't really see an issue with it. Getting through the stages as is really fun, and the collectibles are there for people who want them, but they're not necessary for a minimalist run. So basically, this is what the movie game should have been. Speaking of the collectibles, there's definitely a lot of extra goodies in this game. The main one is the Cosmic Jelly that litters stages and can be found inside the returning tikis or from defeating enemies. These are your main currency for extra costumes, and I think it's a good system. If it worked for Mario Odyssey, it'll work just fine here. Besides that, you've got doubloons, which are hidden pretty well in the levels, or rewards for beating minigames. And when you collect enough, you'll level up, which gives you access to even more costumes to buy. I do really like the way collectibles were handled in this game. Pretty much anytime I decided something looked suspicious or went looking in some random corner, I was pretty much guaranteed to at least find jelly. Well, aside from when I got on top of the lead train car in that Wild West final chase scene and ended up jumping in the locomotive that didn't have any collision detection. To be fair, I did get a pretty good laugh out of that. I guess I should talk about the state the game is launched in, since that was such a big point of contention for Rehydrated, and I gotta say, Purple Lamp definitely learned from that experience, and I'm so glad the game got delayed, because the Cosmic Shake we have now seems to be the actual intended finished product, which shouldn't have to be a compliment, but that needs to be said considering where the game industry is now. I played this game on PC, and I didn't run into any noticeable frame rate drops or big game-ruining glitches or bugs. The worst I came across that I know for sure isn't intentional is the fact that some some tikis don't seem to understand the concept of gravity. Making it even more hilarious is when there's two piles right next to each other on a level, and one will uphold physics, and another gives it the finger. But it didn't happen that often. SpongeBob's body also vanished in a brief bit in this cutscene, but those were the worst things I found in my playthrough, so a patch could easily pave over these and whatever other small cracks players have found by now. One last thing I want to praise is the fan service, because I think Cosmic Shake really knocked it out of the park. More so than any other SpongeBob game. The first thing that stood out was the incorporation of certain SpongeBob staples, namely the time cards, the overly detailed gross-out shots, and specific music cues from the show. I really enjoyed them. They helped get the game's vibes even closer to that of a typical episode of the show, but they weren't overused to the point where they lost their charm. As expected, there's plenty of callbacks to the first 3 seasons, which are always welcome, but I was shocked how many nods there were to the post-movie seasons. 2 of the levels are based on pretty iconic specials, Pest of the West and Dungeons & Dragons. And besides that, between Robert's impressive wardrobe and other bits of detail in the levels and characters, I was finding references to episodes like Karate Island, Toy Store of Doom, Roller Cowards, Krabby Road, SpongeBob's Last Stand, and many, many more. And you know what? I welcome it. I know not everyone is big on SpongeBob after the first movie, but plenty of people still grew up with SpongeBob watching seasons 4 and beyond, and plenty of older fans still watch those later episodes and even have their fair share of favorite episodes from that era, myself included. And I appreciate the devs coming up with creative ways to incorporate the more modern stuff instead of just pretending it never existed. And I know they're not going to do it, but could you imagine how funny it would be if we got a couple costumes based off the particularly infamous episodes? I want to see Whobob Wetpants' disgusting face, Splinter SpongeBob, and Face-Free SpongeBob in a DLC costume pack. Come on. Do it, you cowards, do it. I will say not everything clicked with me. No spoilers here, but the ending in particular feels pretty rushed, and the final boss was kind of disappointing after how great the rest of the game was, and I wasn't really feeling the music. Nothing was bad or annoying or anything, but nothing really stood out, and I genuinely don't think I could hum a track from this game after only a day away from it. Granted, the soundtrack will likely grow on me with another playthrough or two, but it doesn't seem like the music is going to catch on quite as well as other more memorable OSTs under the Sponge's belt. Aside from that though, I can't say I have any other big issues with Cosmic Shake. I know some people are prepared to ask, what's better, this or Battle for Bikini Bottom? And I'm not prepared to answer that right now. Not only do I need time to let the recency bias fade away, but as of now I've only played to the final boss and credits. I wanted to write about the main campaign as soon as possible, but I am going to go back to 100% the game and wrap up the remaining side quest. I'll definitely have a definitive answer by the time I release a more in-depth retrospective of Cosmic Shake, but even if 100%ing it isn't that good, I still think it's earned a cemented spot as one of the best SpongeBob games out there. You could have already guessed this, but I'd recommend this game to anyone who's either a big fan of SpongeBob or 3D platformers. If you're fond of those heavy iron SpongeBob games, well, you probably already bought this game, but if you haven't, buy it. You won't be disappointed. I just hope this game does really well, because if this is what we can expect from Purple Lamp from now on, I think the future of SpongeBob games, and even Nickelodeon games as a whole, are in good, capable, caring hands. Anyway, that's all for now. If you're at all interested in the wacky world of SpongeBob games, I'd suggest checking out my channel and maybe subscribing. I usually do pretty long-winded analytical retrospectives on SpongeBob games, and I've got a Creature from the Krusty Krab video in the works that should be out pretty soon. So stick around if you have any interest in that. Otherwise, thank you all for watching. This has been Baleography, and I wish you all my very best.
I never thought you'd pull it off, but that was actually fantastic! I can already see the sequel. Nay, the trilogy. Let's start shooting immediately!